Cousin slept with my wife, so I got him to confess while drunk and sent the video to my family. Here is my story. Before my wife and I became a thing, we had always been family friends. Her mother was a close friend of my mom, and they used to come around our house a lot when she was a child. My wife and I did not get along so well as children because I used to tease her a lot, but when we became adults, a lot changed. Seeing her often contributed to me falling in love with her, and months after that, we started dating. According to my wife, I was her first real love, and the rest of her college relationships were just her testing the waters. When we started dating, we told our family about us, and they approved of our relationship because she was no stranger to our family. But before we married, we had a serious fight that led to us nearly breaking up. So, there's this cousin of mine that had been my rival since I was a child. He was my maternal cousin, a couple of years older than me. My mom's younger sister had him when she was 16, while my mom waited till 21 to have me with my dad. I can't explain why, but my cousin and I always fought or struggled for something. No matter how our mothers tried to force us, we never seemed to get along. He was also a low-key bully who constantly bullied me all the time, but he'd act well behaved whenever he was with our parents or any adult around. What caused my wife and me to nearly break up was my wife, who was my girlfriend then, made out with him at a family reunion we had, and when I caught them, I was so mad. She knew he was my rival, yet she didn't push him away when he made advances at her. She allowed him to kiss her, which nearly destroyed our relationship. It took me about 3 months for us to make up after that fight. And that was after I looked at things from her angle and realized that she was strongly under the influence of alcohol. Now that I share this, I wish I ended things with her then. Maybe she wouldn't have caused me so much pain after all those years. After my wife and I married, we moved to the state where we worked and only visited our hometown on holidays and important occasions. We were both happy with our lives and lived below our means. Already, we knew kids were not coming into the picture yet, so we never talked about children. In the end, I tried my best to be a great husband, and I supported my wife financially, emotionally, and spiritually, and in the other wheels of life, she needed my support. Aside from our families, we were all we got.
Between my wife and I was the person who only visited our parents on special occasions or invitations, but my wife tried as much as she could to visit our hometown at least twice a month.
Her mother was very sick, and as the only child, she needed to go back and spend some time with her. On some of the weekends she visited her mother, she would sleep over and return on Sunday evenings. This way, she would get to spend time with her mother and see my parents as well. All this while my wife was visiting our hometown. She never returned to tell me that she had seen any of my old friends or hers. She always sounded like the only people she saw were my family and her family, and it felt odd for someone who grew up in the same town with a dozen friends who still lived there. For almost a year, my wife continued to visit our hometown twice a month. Even when her mother recovered from her illness, my wife didn't stop visiting. She said she was drawn to our town and loved how she visited everyone, at least to stay connected to our family. When she said this, I should have suspected something fishy was going on, but I didn't have any reason to doubt my wife because I trusted her and didn't think she would betray me the way she did. By this time, we had been married for 2 years, and our bond had strengthened. 2 months before Christmas, my parents decided to renew their wedding vows because they had been married for 30 years and wanted to reignite their old love. As expected, my wife and I attended the party, and we arrived a day before to help with some things. The next day after the party, my wife suggested that we spend at least one more day with our families, mainly because it had been a long time since I had visited. I agreed, and we stayed for the small family after party. At the after party, my cousin, who had always been my rival and the favorite child of the house, was there too. Knowing I would stay, I invited some of my old friends to get wasted with me. Later that night, while my friends and I, my cousin, and a few other people were drinking and chatting about different unimportant things, my cousin got drunk and began to make a scene. From his childhood, he had always been a bragger around me. It was almost like he always wanted me or everyone to know he was doing better than me, even though he was born out of wedlock. Immediately, my cousin started making a scene. My friend and I laughed about an old memory at the top of our voices, and my cousin got attracted. Instead of continuing with his drama and blabbing, he turned in my direction and started to say things. He began abusing me and my marriage, and when I did not respond, he got pissed and began to tell everyone how he had been sleeping with my wife. The first time he mentioned sleeping with my wife, I thought he was only saying that to get to me, but when he mentioned how she'd come to our hometown on weekends and how they had fun together, I knew he wasn't lying. At this point, the only thing that felt right was to record him as he bragged, so I took out my phone and recorded him as he bragged and exposed his secret. My cousin even went as far as saying that he slept with my wife on purpose to show me that he could also have whatever I had. I was so disappointed in my wife when I heard everything, and I couldn't even hide the embarrassment. When it seemed like his bragging would not end, I was forced to leave everyone. As soon as I got into my parents' house, I met my wife talking to my parents, and I began to yell at her. Before I left my cousin and my friends, I had already sent the video to my wife, so she would know that I knew about her affair. But after she saw it, she told me to not believe anything my cousin said because he was drunk. I believed everything my cousin said because he wouldn't have talked about it if he did not sleep with my wife as he bragged. He would have simply bragged about something else, but not my wife. I was so angry that I confronted her in front of my parents, and after yelling and yelling, she admitted in tears that there were a couple of times she mistakenly slept with my cousin, the one person she knew I hated so much. My parents had to intervene and were so disappointed that my wife was cheating on me. Her mom, who was also in the room with my parents, was so disappointed in her, and she left the house in shame. I had also dropped the recording of my drunk cousin on our WhatsApp family group chat, and everyone had finally seen that he wasn't the good person they all thought he was. That night, I didn't sleep at home because I could not stand the shame and embarrassment, so I drove to a nearby motel. My parents and wife kept calling me the whole night, but I didn't take anybody's call. The following day, I texted my mom that I was returning to the town I lived in and left my wife there. She also came home later that evening, but I had packed my clothes and other valuables, and I left the house for her. When she called me that evening to ask where I was, I told her it was over between us and that my lawyer would be the next person she would hear from. I wasn't ready to listen to her explanations, so I blocked her number and blocked her on all of our mutual social media platforms. Our divorce was difficult for me, but I went through with it. We are divorced now, and my family sees her differently now. My mom and her mom are still friends, but she isn't welcome to our house. I have learned a lesson, and whenever I see red flags in my future relationships, I will not try to justify them because a leopard never changes its spots. Anyways, 3 years have passed, and I have not been able to completely forget that night. It still haunts me in my sleep, and as for my cousin, there can never be any form of friendship between us because he is no different from an animal. Many things have changed in my family after everyone saw him brag in that video, and I'm pleased with the new way they treat him. Now on to the next story. Story 2. Mill leaves me with a ridiculous chore list before going on vacation, so I burn it and make a long overdue call that changes everything. I, 29F, have been married to my husband, 32M, for 5 years. My husband took up a project in Europe about a year ago and is supposed to stay there for 3 more years to work on the project. So he's been away and I've been at home with our 3-year-old son. We were supposed to move with him, but my mother-in-law forced him to leave us behind and go on his own. She believed that it wouldn't be good for our son to move so frequently, 3 years here and then the next 3 years in Europe and then back here, and after a lot of contemplating, my husband and I decided that my mother-in-law was right, so I remained here with my son. She also convinced me to move in with her so that we could all live together as a family, and I agreed to it readily since then I wouldn't even have to pay for daycare or a nanny when I go off to work. My mother-in-law would take care of my son for me. It was a win-win situation for all of us and we agreed to it readily. I'd always been on good terms with my in-laws, so I didn't think there was anything off or weird about this, and around a year back, I moved in with my in-laws a couple weeks after my husband left. It was all very nice during the first few weeks, but slowly, my mother-in-law started changing her behavior. She started making me do all the chores around the house, cooking, cleaning, laundry, and whatnot because they were too old. I didn't notice it initially, and by the time I did, it was too late. She'd started treating me like a housemaid and would make me do all the chores around the house, and if I said that I was too tired, then she'd start taunting me and the way I was raised to be lazy and spoiled. We got into a lot of fights, but after a while, she'd apologize to me with tears and I'd end up forgiving her time and again. And whenever my husband would visit, the entire family would be on their best behavior. For obvious reasons, I mean, they can't mistreat me when he's around because they rely on him to fund them because my in-laws don't earn enough and desperately need my husband to keep sending them money. My father-in-law and mother-in-law are both retired and my sister-in-law is in college, so my husband and I are the only earning members of the family. My own parents aren't alive anymore. My dad passed away when I was 10 and I lost my mother 6 years back. Had they been around still, I would have moved out immediately to stay with them instead of in this hellhole, but my hands were tied. I couldn't tell my husband about the way his parents were treating me either because I was scared of what would happen next. It sounds stupid because I'm an adult, working woman, and one call to my husband would have solved all my problems, but I still couldn't bring myself to do it even after almost a whole year of being treated like crap by my in-laws. I really did like my in-laws and they'd been kind to me for a really long time before this mistreatment started, and I just kept hoping that somehow, someday, they'd go back to treating me well, but that didn't happen. 3 days back, I finally realized that my in-laws were never going to change, and all the times that they apologized to me was just for show, to pacify me and make sure that I didn't tell my husband anything. My in-laws have a family tradition of going on holiday for a week or so every year, and ever since I'd started dating my husband, I was included in those trips as well. But this year, since my husband wouldn't be able to make it, I decided to stay back and get some much needed time away from my in-laws. I'd heard my mother-in-law and father-in-law planning to leave a week from now, but they hadn't asked me anything, so I decided that whenever they did speak to me about it, I'd tell them that I wanted to stay back. And a few days ago, my mother-in-law finally brought it up with me. However, even before I could communicate my decision to them, my mother-in-law handed me a list of chores that needed to be done by the time they returned. I was dumbstruck while I was reading through the list and barely even listened to whatever my mother-in-law was saying, explaining that she wanted me to do all of this while they were on vacation. I was reeling from what she'd just said to me anyway, but I totally lost it when I read clean both loos. I just snapped and screamed at her for the next 10 minutes about how she was a disgustingly entitled old hag and I was going to none of this. I grabbed the list, stomped off to the kitchen in a fit of rage, and set fire to the list while my mother-in-law tried to argue with me. And then, I did what I should have done a long time ago. I grabbed my phone and made the call to my husband that had been long overdue, and right in front of my mother-in-law, I told him everything that I'd been holding back for so long. My mother-in-law kept screaming in the background about how I was lying and it was just a really chaotic phone call in general, but my husband managed to calm me down and told me that he would take the next flight back home to deal with this. He said that he was scheduled to come back in a few days anyway, but he was going to make it earlier to fix whatever was happening at home, and until then, he advised me to take our son and go to the nearest hotel, so that's what I did. My mother-in-law kept screaming and sobbing while I packed my son's and my own clothes up, but I ignored all of it and left with my son. I couldn't forgive them anymore because they'd proven time and again that they weren't sorry at all. I've been living in the hotel with my son for the past 3 days. My husband is supposed to arrive tomorrow and we're waiting for him to come back so he can sort this whole thing out. Not because I depend on him, but because I can't do everything all at once since I'm all on my own right now and I need to look after my son as well, who's confused by the change in scenario. A few hours ago, I finally received the first message after I left from my mother-in-law. It was a text saying that she was sorry about the way she'd treated me and she'd finally realized that I must have taken it the wrong way. She told me that she'd just assumed that I wouldn't be interested in coming along since my husband wasn't here, and so, she gave me that list because she'd assumed that I'd be at home, and since I wouldn't be that busy, I could get all the work done by the time they'd be back. She admitted that she'd been too quick to assume and that must have rubbed me the wrong way, and she sincerely apologized for it. Then she told me that I overreacted the other day and so did she. She wanted me to let bygones be bygones and forget all about it so that we could start afresh. She even added that she considered me no less than her own daughter and this colossal misunderstanding was hurting her as well, probably even more than it was hurting me, and she really wanted me to come back. Ida for reacting the way I did the other day? Update 1. Okay, hey. So my husband came back a few days ago and things have been really stressful since then. He drove straight to the hotel from the airport to visit me first and talk to me about what had happened. I explained it all to him and even showed him the text that his mother had sent me a few days ago, but I hadn't responded to it because I knew she was just bluffing in order to pacify me yet again so that I wouldn't make the situation with her son even worse. But I didn't buy it and saw right through her, so I didn't respond to the text either. Besides, all the messages and comments here advised me against responding to her as well, so I think I did the right thing. My husband is furious with his family and has decided to cut them out of his life entirely, and that's a decision I can get behind. It's harsh, but it's nothing short of what they deserve because the past year has been a total nightmare for me. I wish I could be the bigger person and let this go, but I can't and I won't. I'd kept silent about this for a really long time because somewhere deep down, I'd received a lot of love and affection from these very same people in the past, and I'd hoped that they would change for the better eventually, but they didn't and kept disappointing me with their cruel behavior and fake apologies repeatedly. And yeah, maybe I missed my own parents, so in a way, I'd started considering my in-laws my family, but they didn't deserve any of the love that I'd shown them and definitely not the forgiveness. All the love that they'd shown me in the past when I lived with my husband was for their daughter-in-law and not me as a person, and I was wrong to ever believe that they actually cared about me as an individual. They did care about my son, but that was because he was his father's son as well. It had nothing to do with me. It sucks, but at least now I'm not delusional enough to believe that things would ever get better and have decided to sever all ties with this family. I know where I stand now. My husband and I are now planning to leave for Europe within the next week with our son and do what we were supposed to do according to our original plan. Our son might find it a little difficult to adjust to the sudden change, but he's young, he'll deal with it and get over it soon. I just don't want to stay away from my husband any longer, and neither does he. He can't quit his job because it's really lucrative and pays well, but I have no qualms about quitting my job and moving with him. I don't care, to be honest. I don't have any family here, and the ones I did consider to be my family turned out to be the worst people I'd ever met, so screw them. And I'm an accountant, so I'm sure I'll find a job there, too. If not, then I'll be a som. But I just don't see the point of living separately anymore, and neither do I wish to. My husband hasn't told his family about our decision to make the move and cut ties with them, but we're going to their house tomorrow to pack all our clothes and belongings for the move. Tomorrow will hopefully be the last time I have to see them for a while. I'm nervous to meet them again, but I have to rip this band-aid off, and I have to do it soon. My in-laws don't deserve to be in touch with me or my husband or my son. Update 2. Okay, so my husband and I are back at the hotel. It was a really hectic day for us today since we went back to his parents' house to collect our things. I left my son at a close friend's place because I knew there would be a lot of drama today and I didn't want him to see that. I wish I could say I was proven wrong, but I wasn't. As soon as my husband and I entered the house, my mother-in-law, who had let me in, decided to start acting venomously sweet, and it almost made me barf. This was the same way she'd acted with me during the first 4 years of my marriage, that is before I moved in and she revealed her true colors. Even my father-in-law and sister-in-law were on their best behavior, and it wasn't surprising because all they could see was a bunch of dollars and a maid walking in through the door when my husband and I came by. That's what they really saw us as, but we weren't falling for this little happy family act anymore. They'd had the chance to play happy family with us earlier, but they blew it, and now, there are no more chances for them. My husband was very straightforward and blunt with them and told them that we were just here to collect the things that we'd left behind the other day, and then we'd be out of there. Not just their home but also out of their lives, because the way they'd been treating me in his absence was disrespectful and absolutely unacceptable, so it was necessary for him to cut them out of his life. There was instant uproar when he said this, and then several accusations were hurled, mostly at me. My husband was labeled ungrateful and arrogant and spineless for allowing me to turn him against his own family, and I was called lazy, selfish, and immoral for trying to break up their family on purpose so that I could hog all my husband's attention and money. There was a lot of screaming and shouting, and my voice is actually hoarse right now, but at least I got it all out of my system. All the anger that I'd been suppressing for the last 1 year just bubbled over today, and by the time we were leaving, my mother-in-law was in tears and was still mumbling about how I'd ruined her life and was now stealing her son from her. My husband seemed very upset, but that was quite natural since he just had to put his own family through something so emotionally taxing just for the sake of the family he chose for himself, his wife, and his son. My husband has been quiet ever since we came back, and I'm kind of scared of what he might say. I'm hoping he doesn't go soft and say that he wants to give his family a second chance or something of the sort, because I really wouldn't be able to take that. I think I might leave if he does say that, so I'm really keeping my fingers crossed right now. Update 3. It's been a week since my husband came back, and we've been living in the hotel for a while now. Our flight to Europe is in 4 days, and today, my mother-in-law got in touch with my husband again to apologize for her behavior the other day. This is just her routine now. Screw up, blame other people for it, and then apologize and expect all to be forgiven. It must have worked for me, but my husband isn't stupid. We had a lengthy discussion about how he was feeling about the fight we had the other day, since he looked very upset, and he told me that he wasn't upset that he was fighting with his family, but he was upset because he felt like he'd failed to protect his wife and son from something so emotionally torturous. He told me that even though he'd felt a little bad about confronting his parents and saying all that about cutting them off to them, that stopped as soon as they started yelling at me, and he realized what I must have been going through for the past year. He felt like he'd been a total failure as a husband and a father because he'd allowed his family to treat me like crap and had been so oblivious to the truth as well. That conversation just made me realize that I'd married the right man, because while I'd been worrying that he would go back to his family, here he was, thinking about nothing else but me. I felt guilty for even thinking that he'd forgive his family, but I think my feelings were just all over the place at the time, and I was feeling kind of paranoid and anxious because of what had happened. But then we talked and he put an end to all my worries, and I tried my best to do the same for him. I told him that this wasn't his fault and it had just been a huge misunderstanding. I'd just been too scared myself to stand up against his family and was confused because of all the gaslighting and emotional manipulation, which is why I stayed silent and put up with their behavior for so long. And that was absolutely not on him. I was the one putting them on a pedestal. They'd also been really kind to me before I moved in with them and whenever he was around, so we couldn't exactly blame anyone for how the situation turned out. We led ourselves to believe that they were good, decent, and loving people and would be our safe space for when my husband wouldn't be around, but clearly, that was not the case, and this was nobody else's fault but his parents. They were the bad guys here, not him, and I knew he was nothing like them, so he had nothing to worry about. That made him feel better. And so when his mother reached out to him with her fake apology crap yet again, we were in no mood to take that. We could have blocked her instantly, but we chose to let her know once and for all that we were genuinely not interested in repairing the relationship. What she'd done couldn't be fixed with just a flimsy apology. After sending that message, we finally blocked her. It's been a few hours since then, and my sister-in-law has been calling my husband nonstop however she can. She was probably the least selfish of the three and wouldn't bother me, but she wouldn't stop her mother either, and she definitely never spoke up for me. Neither did she ever offer to lend me a helping hand either, and was just as complicit, but my husband was the one who paid half of her college tuition and she still had 1 semester to go, so that's probably what she was worried about the most now. After a while, my husband answered the call and told her that while he'd still send her money for her to complete her education, that was it. After that, she'd be on her own, and he's also not going to be sending any money to his parents after this, so they can kiss their annual vacations goodbye. I guess his sister tried to argue with him, but he silenced her by saying that if she messed with him any more, then he would cut off her college fund as well, and then she'd actually be screwed, so she had better watch her tongue. I think she must have said something about me because he kind of flared up at that. After a few more minutes of bickering, he finally hung up on her, and right now, he's taking a nap with our son beside him. It's been really stressful for all of us, but I'm happy that we're going through it together, as a family. I know he must have had his own struggles when he was living by himself as well, and while they might not have been as bad as what I was going through here, it still must have been hard to be on your own. I know it was hard for me. I regret ever letting my mother-in-law sweet-talk us into separating in the first place. I bet that's what she wanted me to stay here for anyway, so that she'd have someone to do all the household chores because she didn't want to and she couldn't make her daughter do it. So I did it. Never mind that I had a full-time job as well and would be dog-tired after coming back home, and never mind that I also had a 3-year-old toddler to look after as well. Just makes me wonder how self-centered and cruel people can be. She would have hired a maid to do all the work around the house and clean up after them, but she wanted to save money so she could blow it all on extravagant vacations. Well, she can have her damn vacation now. I'd like to see that as well. Update 4. Hi, everyone. My flight is tomorrow and we're all packed and ready to go. As for my husband's family, I found out last night from a cousin of his that my mother-in-law had been talking crap about me on Facebook and bad-mouthing her own son like nobody's business. She'd accused us of being selfish, using her and her husband as free babysitters for when we needed to go out for work, and left her at home alone with her grandson for hours without bothering to check up on him, basically painting us as bad parents and herself as a poor aged lady forced to work even at this age. Not only that, but she's been saying all sorts of crap about my husband's relatives, like apparently I'd tyrannize them while I was living at their place and make her and her college-going daughter do all the work. She just flipped the narrative and made it sound like I was the one doing whatever she'd actually been guilty of all along. It was amazing that someone could go so low just because they'd been denied monetary help simply because of their own disgusting behavior. And I don't know how exactly this was supposed to help her case in my husband's eyes. Like, he's cutting her off because she'd been treating me badly and her response to that was to start creating even more drama and inviting even more trouble? If she wants my husband to pay her any mind at all, this is definitely not the way to go about it, because if anything, this just made matters worse. His relatives have been calling him left and right, some to berate him, some to console him, but mostly to find out the truth. The ones who are trying to guilt trip us and believing my mother-in-law's side of the story can continue to believe her, but my husband was thankful for the ones who bothered to find out what was going on. We've put up our side online as well to clear it up once and for all. Now, people can choose whatever they want to believe, and we're gonna be just fine with it because we're going away for a long time and won't be back anytime soon. My husband is going to try and get his posting extended for a couple more years, so soon enough, we'll be far away from all of this and none of this drama will have any meaning anymore. I'm excited for what the future holds, and I hope it's just good energy for my family and me.